Welcome everyone to ZeroGrade Talks. And as you know, we're digging into the depth of AI and demystifying it, helping our listeners see the different angles that contribute to AI, how we could deploy responsible and inclusive AI that fits everyone. I'm your host today. I'm Marian, and I'm the founder and CEO of SLP Cornerstone Limited. I am the host of ZeroGrade Talks. I have done a lot in my career, delivery management, data analysis, data science, and have been in the AI industry for at least 3 years now, envisioning and looking for revolutionizing the industry with the smart minds working on it. The great technology and industrial revolution we are actually living at the moment, how we could use it for our own good. So this episode will help us understand how to move from shiny AI demos to systems that actually deliver value, frame problems, and measure what matters. So the goal is to leave you today with concrete steps and confidence in building AI that ships. I'm so excited to have Russ Clay with me today on ZeroGrade Talks. Russ, thank you so much for being with us today. Russ has been diving into the critical area of how to move from shiny to systems that actually save lives, save money, and scale responsibly. And to help us answer that, he's going to share with us his experience, how he moved through his career from delivery to going back to school and learning new things to delivering systems. A rare kind of thinker where he blends information systems, data science, and social psychology to tackle the human and technical sides of AI. So at UVA Health, he co-led the design of an early warning system that literally texted rapid response teams when patients needed help, deployed across multiple units, making a real-world project. But what excites me most about Russ is his philosophy. AI isn't magic, as he says, it's engineering plus empathy. He believes to start measuring what matters and only ship when systems are safe, useful, and maintainable. In other words, he is here to cut through the hype and give us the playbook for AI that ships. Whether you are a leader, wrestling with AI adoption, or just someone curious about where AI meets psychology and decision-making, this conversation is going to be packed with insights you can use tomorrow. Russ, welcome to ZeroGrade Talks. We're so excited about this session. I'm going to kick off the chat with the first question. What is the costliest mistake you have seen when teams anthropomorphized AI?
Marian, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for the conversation. So it's a great question. So here's the thing. I think that is the cost can be a hard thing to quantify, particularly because I think when I've seen this happen the most is in the ideation stage. And so I think one of the common consequences of anthropomorphizing AI and assuming that it has thoughts and it has notions and it has this ability to kind of make decisions and do all these really human things is I think we make assumptions that it can do more things on its own than it probably can, and that it will scale really quickly and really flexibly into all these different use cases that we probably haven't even thought of yet. And so when we make these assumptions in the ideation phase of a project and early on in it, and it takes us down these roads of starting to build and starting to invest a lot of time into a project, and we don't find out until later, hey, I'm not getting the answers I thought I was going to get, or maybe my base case worked, but there's all these other ways that people want to use my system, and it kind of actually falls apart at this time.
Yeah.
At that point, the cost is really the time you've invested at that point when you could have been doing something else. And that's
Correct.
it's a hard thing to quantify, but I think if we were more practical and we were more grounded in understanding how AI systems, and I'm talking specifically about LLM-based AI systems,
Understood.
how things work and what they can do, and how you really need to invest time into guiding them into maybe we would waste less time kind of assuming that we were going to get more than we eventually do. And I think that's probably just part of the maturation of this field, is understanding that kind of thinking has got to go into the beginning of any kind of project when we want to add it. But I think we still have very rose-colored glasses on in a lot of cases right now, and we start to assume that these models can kind of inject magic into what we're doing. And there's a much more practical take that we've got to go with if we're going to get real value out of them.
Yeah, absolutely, Russ. And actually, reminds me of how we actually got to meet each other through our AI workshop, where we actually spoke about involving the user right from the ideation stage in the research, where we actually built with the people who the system is intended to serve, and for the people that are going to use the system, because the end user and the target audience tends to change through the research process. And you rarely actually start with the right target audience right from the get-go in the ideation stage. I really agree with you about the pink glasses, because the way we're treating AI at the moment does give it more than it actually can do. And reading about actually from some of the people who were actually working in OpenAI, AI had actually accelerated over the last 4 years more and faster than anyone was anticipating it to do. It is good technology acceleration and a leap. However, if we are not building with intention and responsibly, this system is going to flood with many defects that we will have to take care of and, like live with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And from that angle, I would like to hear from you about your threat detection research and how it shaped your view of AI risk.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So and maybe we'll get into this a little bit throughout the conversation. So I have a background as a social psychologist, and a lot of my research at that time when I was in academia was focused on human threat detection systems and how those shape our perceptions and our group relationships and kind of all these other factors of human life, and this was really coming from an evolutionary perspective. Why would our evolve to make us interpret the world in ways, hopefully, that will keep us safe, but that makes us attend to threats, right? And so, but in that time, I spent a lot of time trying to understand, well, how do we perceive things, and how do we decide what to pay attention to, and how does the brain actually sift through all the information that we get and kind of hone in on these very specific targets that matter to us. And so that gave me a sense of how we view the world and how we perceive our environment and how we decide what to think about and what to pay attention to. And then, in that process, I start to understand, well, kind of how are we processing information, and how could a non-human system potentially do something similar, right? And so,
Yeah.
a long philosophical tradition about artificial intelligence that I come from, as we got into the stage where the term AI started to be really ubiquitous in our lives, it was very different than what I was used to, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
AI, from a philosophical standpoint, is something that is indistinguishable from human interaction. And it's really, you play all these games to try to determine whether you're interacting, in the philosophical tradition, play a bunch of games to try to determine interacting with a human or a non-human entity. And I think it's still pretty easy for us to do that with the quote unquote AI systems that we have now, right? But so I've had to kind of have this shift. What are we actually talking about when we talk about AI? Because I think as a psychologist, I would back away from calling it intelligent. However, I think I've come across as probably being fairly negative about AI to this point, but I think it is amazing what it can do, specifically from a language perspective. The ability for a completely statistically based system to generate meaningful language that can convince a lot of people that it is a thinking, knowing entity is amazing, without a doubt. And the technology is just getting started. And so, I am amazed, but I am also tempered in what I think it can do and what I think it can do, right? And I think the way that our LLM-based AI works is very different from the way a human brain works. Those are just two different systems solving problems in two very different ways. And they're both very useful, but they have there's different biases and different ways that we have to think about what are we going to actually get out of these systems. And I'm particularly talking about our LLM-based AI right now. That really, I think, has shaped, for me, what can it be useful for? How should we interact with it? What should we expect from it? And where should we really kind of draw the limitations on what we think it can do and what control we should give it?
So I do agree with you, Russ, and this is really brings an angle that is really critical. So from the book Situational Awareness by Leopold Aschenberner, who actually used to work for OpenAI, ChatGPT, I think in 2022, it was actually, I think before 2022, it actually couldn't form a string together for a few plausible sentences. And then it was a very cherry-picked example of a semi-coherent story about unicorns. So it said actually that it compared ChatGPT 2 in 2019 to a preschooler. I quote from the book, it says, wow, it can string together a few plausible sentences. So like a very cherry-picked example of a semi-coherent story about unicorns in the Andes, incredibly impressive at that time. And we're talking about 2019. In 2022, ChatGPT 4 came out. It was compared to a smart high schooler. All right. And I quote again, it says, wow, it can write pretty sophisticated code and iteratively debug. It can write intelligently about complicated subjects. It can reason through difficult high school competition math. It's beating the vast majority of high schoolers on whatever tests we can give. From code to math to Fermi estimates, it can think and reason. GPT-4 was then useful in many daily tasks, okay, from helping write code to revising drafts. And that was in 2023. But also the book debates, okay, as the technology start getting more intelligent through the years and quickly, how do we treat it? Because it's really a key question. How do you perceive AI?
Right. And, I think that's so key. How do we perceive the AI, right? Because you're right, the language capabilities and the responses, the sophistication of the responses that we're getting is progressing at a pretty rapid rate. I mean, I started using ChatGPT 5 within the last couple of weeks, and when I compare that to other GPT-4, other reasoning models that we've got out there, it's a pretty clearly better result. However, I'm going to be really careful about using the word intelligence to talk about it, because I came across this great example the other day, and I can't take credit for making it up. But if you go out and you ask ChatGPT 5, hey, I just had this interaction. I went and bought a pair of shoes, and I love the shoes, and they're great. However, when I got home and I opened the box, I found out that they had switched. Instead of a left shoe, they gave me a right shoe. And instead of a right shoe, they gave me a left shoe. Now, they're both the right size, but they got the shoes wrong. What should I do about it? And instead of recognizing that, like, you still have the right shoes, you have one right and one left, and that's exactly what you need, right? ChatGPT 5 will tell you, oh, this is a classic mix-up, and here's what you do. You go back to the store, and you make sure you have your receipt, and you do all the things you need to do, right? So it is not intelligent in that sense. It's giving you the best language that it can to come up with the solution to the problem that it infers that you have because you said there was this mix-up at the store, right?
Yeah.
Yet I would say plenty of high schoolers would still recognize that, like, this is not actually a problem, that the problem is in the wording of the prompt. It's not necessarily
exactly absolutely
scenario. So, but that aside, if your prompt is correct, and if you're asking it a very well structured question and giving it very solid parameters around what you want to get back, you can get some really, really great information, substantial, complex, written like you want it to be written, and very quickly, right? And so this is something that can be huge for efficiency in businesses and in information exchange. That's massive. But again, we have to recognize it is not the thinking problem solver. It is producing it is assembling this language and producing something, hopefully according to some very specific guidelines that we give it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is where we're going to dig in later on about LLM components and validating them and demystifying them a little bit more, because you have done a lot of research about this. And your insights will be very valuable for our listeners. I don't know where else they would get it because there's a lot of hype in the market. And again, I think one of the words that I've come to really appreciate throughout my chats, recent chats, is AI in general with its statistics and how it's formed. It can regenerate from what we fed into it already. It does not create. And we need to understand this very well because thinking about that will help us avoid one of the key risks, which is cognitive degradation. If we actually start relying on ChatGPT and AI, and this is actually a study that happened in one of the universities, they tested the people who were using ChatGPT for cognitive skills, and there was degradation in their skills. The research proved. So we really need to be very specific with that. So going back to the threat detection research and how it shaped your view of AI and risk. So in the early warning system, what made it clinically relevant? I mean, can we just call it another dashboard? Or what distinguishes it?
So yeah, and so this is a little transition away from kind of my psychology career to I spent about 7 years as a data scientist at the University of Virginia Health System. And one of my main projects there was we created an early warning system for hospitalized patients. And so that system took in data from the electronic health records, the vital sign data, the blood lab scores that were being processed by the nurses. All that data was going into the patient chart. And this system extracted that data and then made predictions about what's the probability that a patient is going to need to move from kind of the standard floor to the ICU within the next 24 hours, right? That just to kind of set the basis for what the aim of that system was. And this was not an LLM based system. So this was all statistical modeling and forecasting. I think that still probably falls under the umbrella of what people are currently calling AI.
Yep.
But just to be clear, it wasn't LLM based, although I kind of think like it might be interesting to go back and kind of add that because I think at this point there might be a lot of additional value we could get. Anyway, the original question was what made it clinically relevant. And I think there were a couple of things that were really important to making it not a dashboard, but a clinically relevant tool. One, it was a forecast. So a dashboard is telling you something about the current state of the patient and potentially the recent history of the patient as well. We were forecasting what was going to happen and not just making a blank prediction, but we were putting a probability around that prediction, which I think that made it clinically relevant in a way because we were able to assess the probability that some bad outcome was going to happen. The second thing that was really key, I don't think we would have ever gotten off the ground with, is it was not a black box. We had to be able to tell the physician or the responding nurse or whoever was going to go to the bedside, why are we sending you there? We can't just say there's a risk that this patient is going to deteriorate and leave it at that. Like that responding clinician, physician needed something to attend to. They needed something to check when they got to the bedside. So the blood pressure is high, the temperature is high, there's an elevated white blood cell count. And generally, if it was just one factor, they could probably figure that out themselves. I think the value that we were adding is we were combining multiple factors and saying, well, in combination, this low blood pressure with this high white blood cell count, like this is indicating there's probably an underlying infection and you need to deal with that, right? Or you need to attend to this other, combination of factors that is non-normal that is going on with the patient, right? But we were giving them something to check when they got bedside. And so even if the decision ultimately was that this patient's stable, they're okay, generally the clinicians agreed, like, this is not a normal set of measurements, and it is a good thing you had us go check on them, right? It's better that they're here based on our judgment than if nobody had attended to this and the patient had continued to decline. So that gave it clinical relevance. The third thing, this is probably not necessarily clinical relevance, but what gave it operational utility, is that we had to make sure that it was not overwhelming the system. We had a limited number of rapid response nurses
I
on
was
staff.
about to ask about the
Yeah.
criteria.
You can't just continue firing alarms constantly and have people just
Yeah.
running to every bed possible, right? Like, there's one, that would create alarm fatigue and people would stop trusting the signal. Two, there's just not enough resources to go around. So, we were constrained in that we needed to make sure that the predictions were accurate, they were useful, and that they were spread out enough. They were infrequent enough that we had the resources to respond to them. And when we got that combination of factors right, we got a lot of really good feedback on the system. And from everything I've heard, they are still continuing to use that system today. I haven't been at UVA for about 3 years now, but they're still using it in the hospital.
Amazing. And honestly, I'm hearing a lot there. And the gate criteria before any system like that touches production is really critical. And I think it's one of the bottlenecks for many systems. And one that sadly, I don't want to be negative, but many products and teams fail to meet this criteria. Part of AI at the moment is going into the tooling mindset, where you deploy tools that people can use and, feel excited about, but then it overwhelms the person or the end user, and they tend to bypass the system and park it. And the adoption curve is not really healthy. And this is one thing that I've heard from many people who are looking into AI, that they go like, I'm going to invest in this tool, and then people are going to get back to do things the way they have been doing them. Because, they're used to that, and the adoption training is quite critical for systems like that to, get the value of the system.
I was going to say, and it's maybe we overlook it too often, but this is a lot of AI systems, or the way we interact with AI systems. It's a very different way to work. And I'm kind of generalizing across a lot of different industries here, but I think we're right that there is a lot of efficiency to be gained if we use these systems the right way. And there are a lot of mundane tasks we can take away from people so that they can really get more fulfillment out of their roles potentially. But that is still a big cultural shift, and any kind of cultural shift takes time. It takes guidance. It takes leadership support. There's a lot of things that have to go into helping people evolve to work in a different way than they've been trained, in a different way that they've been used to, a different way that they maybe feel comfortable with. And so there are a lot of guardrails and support that have to go along with that in order to have that be a positive, successful adoption.
Amazing. I'm really hearing very useful keywords here, like guardrails, and which is quite mainstreaming now that people are speaking about, but in practice, it's really difficult. And I want to ask you, what is your go-to method for detecting and responding to model drifts? Speaking about guardrails.
Yeah. And this can be, on the surface, it seems easy, right? Like that you just measure how accurately, like you get a key statistic that you have prior to rollout, and you know how the model's performing, and you just keep measuring that, and you let it send you a message whenever it gets away from what it originally was. But it is not that easy a lot of times.
Yeah.
I'll go back and use the example of the early warning system that we had. So we actually came up with a metric. We called it a rough transfer. And so this was a unplanned transfer from the acute care floor of a hospital to the intensive care unit within a 24-hour period that was not planned, because sometimes patients actually get transferred for procedural reasons. There are things that they do in the ICU that they just don't do on the acute care floor. So they plan it out and they take them there, they observe them, and then they bring them back. So we were looking at unplanned transfers, and they happen really rapidly. And we wanted to reduce those. All right. The problem is if your system is effective in doing that, you don't have those things to be able to measure anymore, right? You don't have any,
Yeah.
like, so you can maybe have a reduction in these, I'll call it rough transfers for this example, but kind of whatever your outcome metric is, if it is a system designed to eliminate or to reduce the incidence of some bad outcome, right? Let's
Yes.
say your bad outcomes go down. You still need to know that it's because of what your system did, right? That there just weren't fewer outcomes to detect in the first place. And so you've got to have good systems set up to try to understand, and this is where I go back to my academic training and my statistical background and
Yes.
understanding kind of causal analysis in the way these things happen. But you've got to be able to say, like, well, I'm not detecting these things as much anymore. Is it because of what my system is doing, or is it I wouldn't have seen them anyway? And so that can kind of be a hard thing to do, because if your model drifts, if it is not good at picking up those things anymore, but by coincidence or your outcome events that you're trying to limit have gone down or they've changed, you could mistakenly attribute that to your model and your performance. And you can pat yourself on the back and say that your system is doing a great job when actually it's not actually doing anything, but you've gotten lucky, right? And then you really get blinders. And so so for me, getting back to the question, well, how do you prevent that? I think we have to think really carefully ahead of time. What are we going to measure? How are we going to know that we can attribute a change in this measurement to our system? And how can we set up and, I think, ideally automate the collection of that information so that we have a really good early signal of any change in this outcome that we don't want, or over time, any slow change that makes it seem like our model is not having the effect that we want, right? Because your model starts becoming part of the system. It's not
Correct.
detached. It's not just an observer. It's
Yeah.
influencing the way things work, and that can have changes in unintended ways. And so you really have to be clued in. And so this is where it gets to be different with every system. Like, what is that specific thing you're going to measure, and how can you be really confident that what you're doing and what your model is doing is having the intended impact on that outcome, and that is maintaining that impact over time. And that's something that you need to track. And
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to reflect quickly, because I usually like to say you get what you measure. Yeah, so it's about the measures that you set for the model and for the system. And also most of the cost is incurred in the inference, where, like when you deploy the model into production, and the MLOps, which is really a big topic that different segments in the market do not account for, because you build your model and it works well, it's performing, but what about model degradation and when it goes through MLOps? So get a good model into production is not easy, and it has a lot of stages that it has to go through. So those measures are quite critical to make sure that a model that ends at the end of the pipeline is actually what you intended for when you built it. And
absolutely.
yeah, so I would like to ask you for an example of validating an LLM component, and how can we do that with programmatic checks?
Yeah. So that, and this is, I was actually going to go there anyway. Like, you had me thinking about that to begin with, because this is a very different brand of problem, because
Yes.
now we are evaluating, we want to evaluate the output of an LLM model
Yeah.
by design. And the valuable part of an LLM model is that it is not stochastic. It is not giving you a static result that will always be the same.
Correct.
I guess you could set the temperature threshold in your model to 0, and then
Yeah.
it'll kind of always give you but that's not where the value of an LLM is. The
Yeah.
value of an LLM is that it's creative and there's some randomness in it. And that with that randomness comes unpredictability and kind of a guarantee that you can have a repeatable. You won't necessarily get the exact same output every time, but hopefully your responses will stay within a range of possibilities that you're okay with, right? But again, this is a hard thing. This is less quantifiable. And so, I mean, I think the way that people started doing this was just human judgment, right? Look at a couple of responses and they'd say, hey, this look good to me. I'm okay with it. I've asked this question at some conferences to some leaders that I really respect. And
Yeah.
so I'm actually currently, I'm working for consulting for a company they're building AI tools for editors for academic journals, right? To help assist
Amazing.
with the manuscript review process, right? And so this is where now we're talking about the LLM tools are making judgments, they're making assessments about kind of the content of text. And so, one, there are ways to quantify this. So I will, call out LangChain and Langsmith in particular is they're creating some good Python packages for doing this kind of automated evaluation of models. And I'm gonna call out the packages. Please don't ask me to kind of get in depth because I'm really starting to just wrap my heads around what my
Yeah,
head
understood.
they can do and how to best use them. But I think what I'm optimistic about is that people are recognizing this as a place where we really do need to have good tools. I was talking with somebody else several months ago in their business. They have kind of an automated pipeline set up where, if they're using these LLM tools internally to provide some text-based responses, I think they're doing it for customer service. So they're saving all the responses and they actually have another LLM model that is the evaluator, right? And so they'll save these responses, and once a day, they'll have the evaluator look at the question, look at the answer, and evaluate the quality of that answer. There are tools, especially with vector databases, where you can kind of look at the embedding scores of these models, and you can get close to quantifiable results to say, hey, this is within the range of scores that we're looking for. Even though this is text, this is a good qualified response to the question that we've got. But so they're setting up automated tools that will look at the prompts, at the responses, create evaluations, and kind of do that on a daily or weekly basis and make sure that that there isn't that kind of drift that we're talking about. And I think that's starting to become the best practice that we're seeing now, and hopefully that will continue to evolve.
Speaking about the cadence of measuring and checking the model, plus maintaining the model, which is another hat that we have to put on when we're working with AI systems, have to maintain it, and how much it costs to retrain. Those are another practices and angle that we need to keep in mind when we are evaluating the components of the system.
You pointed at a couple of key factors. One, particularly being cost, right? So there are businesses that are trying to sprout up around the use of these tools in order to add efficiency and to create value for their clients, but there's a cost to using the models, right? And if the client isn't the one paying directly for the model, they're paying the business for their use of the model, right? And so, what I've seen is that we're getting more task specialization, right? So we have to think about these particular subtasks in the process of solving a problem, and those different subtasks may be better suited for different models. And some of these may be small language models, or some of the some require a reasoning model, some require a web search model, some require models that are better suited for just synthesizing information, right? But there are different models that are tuned and trained and are better at those different tasks, and they all have different costs, right? And so figuring out what's the best model for the specific task at the right price, and figuring out how to chain all those together to optimize, one, the solution to the problem, and two, the cost, so that businesses can actually make margins and be profitable with these systems. That's the key. That's the game that I think a lot of these startups are needing to play right now. And it's a rapidly changing environment, right?
It
The
is.
models are changing. The way the tools that allow you to use the models are changing. I mean, I'll go back to GPT. There's a big restructuring on the way that those models work and their ability to do web searches. The learning that I had to do initially with using those tools, I said, oh, this is great. I want to do web search. And so I used GPT-5 in a kind of a Python environment to do a web search. And I looked at what I got back, and it looked great. And I had all these links that were relevant to the question I asked it. And then I went back to the documentation. I said, oh, I actually didn't use this correctly. I don't think I actually did a web search. How did I get these good links back? And it turns out it'll still give you links from the data that it was trained on that are relevant to the question, but it didn't actually go out and do web searches. So to the model drift question, if you continue to use that model over time, your information would get older and older and older because it wouldn't actually going out to the web, right? And then when I did go, when I figured that out and I kind of restructured my problem, I went out to the web, I got a lot of better information. I also paid a lot more for that LLM call. So there's a cost to doing things right as well. And so that's where we start to recognize like how you have to balance some of these things to make sure that you are using the tool that you need when you need it and probably not using it when you don't need it. And you could use something that is potentially better designed for the task and potentially better cost, a more cost-effective solution as well.
Thank you so much for dwelling on this, because I know that I just threw it out there in the chat. And setting the thresholds, okay? When we get misses and they are catastrophic or they're false alarms and they are costly. So setting those thresholds, as I think it's very decent and wise to do that. So would love to hear a bit more from you about this.
Yeah, and this is, I kind of went back to the early warning system when I think about this, because in this, to me, this becomes a question that you can solve with economics. So what we did in that instance, we actually had a 3-factor solution that we had to consider. So in the early warning system, we had the cost of a false alarm, which is the responding clinician's time, the cost of a miss, which is really bad, right? Because then you're potentially not responding to a patient who needs it. And then you just have alarm fatigue potentially,
Yeah.
which is, that's in with the cost of the alarm, but there's also this kind of cumulative cost. So what we ended up doing in that scenario is we actually put numbers on this, right? And they weren't absolute numbers, they were relative numbers. And so we basically said, well, the cost of and I'm making up numbers here. I don't remember off the top of my head the exact numbers we used, but the cost of failing to detect a patient who's really deteriorating is 50 times worse or 100 times worse than failing than mistakenly alerting on a patient who doesn't need it, right? I mean, call it 200 or 1,000 times worse, whatever. But we had to kind of come up with like kind of a justifiable way to set those costs. And then we kind of had an upper threshold for like how many alarms can we actually tolerate per hour or per shift, 8-hour shift of the clinician or something like that. How many can we actually respond to usefully, right? And then you just optimize. You say, well, what is the lowest combination of those costs? And I'm talking about kind of in historical data. So we set up a whole simulation scenario where we say, okay, I have access to all this historical data before we had this system running. What if my system was running? And let me just run this historical data through the system and set my thresholds for alerting and optimize. When is my cost going to be the lowest? My overall cost, when I combine this X or 1,000X cost for missing a patient versus the cost of a false alarm, and what's the overall number of alerts that I get in an 8-hour period for that, right? And so when we triangulate and we get those numbers and we tune the threshold of the alerting system in a way to try to optimize those costs, and then we look and we say, okay, well, what have we got here? How many patients are we actually going to alert on? What's the reduction in this outcome measure that we would have seen had this system been working in that case? Do we have the capacity to actually respond in that sense? So this is one example, but when we looked at it and we said, okay, this is what would have happened. Are we good with it? Is this better than what we've got currently? And ultimately the answer was, yeah, we wish we would have had this running there. So let's implement this. That gave us the confidence to go ahead. And that was what allowed us to make the case that in our best judgment, this is a quality system that may save lives. It will make more optimal use of our clinicians' time, but we still didn't roll that out blindly, right? We rolled it out and we tracked it, and we had it in shadow mode for a month or so, where it was, okay, it's alerting, but let's still kind of run business as usual, right? And
very responsible.
A couple of key players are going to see these alerts, and we got through a couple of months and they said, hey, yeah, I think everything that this sent, even if the patient didn't need to go to the ICU, I still think it was a valuable call. We still should have been there, right? And so then we said, okay, let's do it. And we were able to get senior leadership buy-in after kind of going through that process, putting that historical analysis in play and kind of holding everything up and saying, we feel really Like we've covered all our bases. And, I think the summation of that, and this is something I would say for any system we put out there, I think what we really did is say, what could go wrong? And have we thought of all the things that could go wrong? And do we have a plan in place to deal with those things? Have we covered our bases on anything that could go wrong? Like we want it to go right, but first let's make sure that it's not going to go wrong in bad way, right? And as long as we cover that base primarily, then we can move forward with making things right and making things as right as possible and doing the best job we can, right? But we have to make sure that we are not going to create problems with this, with any kind of system we roll out.
Those are really practical strategies for navigating uncertainty. And so let's think about one key takeaway that we should have or keep in mind when thinking about practical strategies and navigating uncertainty. I know you've given a lot of examples and you've really spoken about a lot of guardrails, you've said there, and thresholds. And I want our users to just hear a bit more about the practical strategies they could think of in general. So let me just bring one example I just remembered while you were talking about the project. So I was actually doing the graduation project for my data science boot camp, and we worked on a skin cancer detection model. Speaking about data and historical data, this is actually one key challenge in the market because there is no good, clean, well-maintained data in the market for people to use and to train and to experiment. And this is one key gatekeeper in the market that is really keeping a lot of people from innovating. But I mean, when things are available, people could use it in a good way or in a bad way. This is another thing that we need to think of. But we used a Stanford data set that it's the first publicly available skin data set that could help you train a neural network for skin detection. We used PyTorch, looking at the matrix and how we're going to measure the performance of the model. Should it be accuracy or should it be...
Well, accuracy is probably balanced, right? So that's just overall how often was it right? But if you're talking about detection and it's a binary outcome, right? So you have sensitivity, which is how many of the test, or specificity, which is when it says that it's the outcome case, how often is it right? So there's lots of different ways you can measure, and they are potentially, like, it depends on the problem you're trying to solve, which one is the right one.
Absolutely. So in a medical setting like that, and the model we were building, we actually didn't go with accuracy. We went with specificity and sensitivity of the model because you would rather detect false cases than lose or miss a false positive.
Well, so you'd rather have a false positive than or you would rather have a false positive than a false negative. You would rather say that there's skin cancer than say that there's not when there really is, right?
Exactly. We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about something that touches very sensitive processes in very critical systems. So when one tactic for teaching operators to interrogate models and model outputs, and without eroding trust of the model, because I know that this could actually affect the model itself. So how can we do that?
I mean, to an extent, I think that's cultural, right? Like, so there's this bias that I think we tend to have, that if it's a model judgment or a system judgment, it needs to be 100% accurate. If it's human judgment, we understand that there's going to be mistakes, right? And so to this kind of training of the operator, what I've tried to do, and I'm not going to say that this is necessarily effective, because I think we're trying to overcome, again, going back to my academic days, I think we're trying to overcome human psychology a little bit here.
Yeah.
I think we really have to be grounded in saying, is the system doing better than the human that we're trying to assist here would do on its own, right? But there's this really kind of emotional level aversion to that, I think. Like, and I'll point to self-driving cars as an example, right? Like, we are not okay with a self-driving car to have an accident, right? We assume are
absolutely
never have an accident. Humans have accidents all the time, right? And so the real metric would probably be, is the self-driving car much less prone to accidents than the human driver, right? But we don't think of it that way. And that's a hard one, right? But if I would kind of use that same logic and I come back to kind of, if I'm deploying any AI system and it's a detection system and I want to train the operator and I don't want the operator to lose confidence in that system, I think we kind of regularly have to show and track and display, is this system doing better? And this is probably more of like a longitudinal design. Are we doing better under this system than we were doing prior to the system?
Yeah.
Have we improved the goal of the system is to do X. Are we doing a better job at X than we were when we didn't have the system in place, right? And then hopefully that is a reminder of the value that system is adding. But I think there is a very real propensity over time to either assume that a system should be flawless and always correct, and we don't have tolerance for any errors in a system, which may or may not be practical. Or we get really used to the quality that a system produces, and that biases us to assuming that it shouldn't make any errors, or it should make much less than it actually does. Kind of losing perspective that, if humans were doing this without the assistance of the system, we might actually be a lot worse off. So I think that's the basis that I try to come back to in any system like this. Like, value is the system adding, not just is it doing kind of in an absolute sense a perfect job.
I think it's thought-provoking. I think the data scientists, AI solution architects, everyone that is going to listen to it, it's gonna resonate with what they're facing,
Appreciate it, yeah.
So, Russ, if I'm a company and I have a POC that I want to deploy to production, and I have 90 days, and don't ask me why 90 days, but it seems like a reasonable time frame for the markets.
Sounds like a pretty round number that people throw out very often.
So I want to ask you for a bare minimum playbook that we would play by.
Yeah. And I think it'll probably reflect on a lot of the same topics that we've already talked about. I mean, so if you have a POC, you've shown that you can at least solve the problem in theory that you aim to solve, right? But now you've got to turn that into a system that is deployable, it is sound, it is hopefully scalable. So I think a really solid understanding of all of the goals of the system. What are the non-negotiable things that system has to be able to produce? And have you clearly demonstrated in your POC that it will do those things? Hopefully you have. I'm going to go back to saying what could go wrong. So what are all the ways that people could potentially, once it's out of your control, what are all the ways that people could potentially misuse the system, either unintentionally or intentionally?
Yeah.
And what are the potential results that you would get if that happened? And how can you guard against those things? So like in a POC, you're probably showing that the thing you want to have happen will happen under ideal circumstances, right? But there's a lot of times when we are not under ideal circumstances. And so what is going to happen to your system then? This is where you really start poking at all of the scenarios that you probably didn't think of as much in POC. And so this is where we go back to start bringing up guardrails. What are all the ways that we can ensure that the users of the system are funneled into using it the way you want them to be using it, and not in a lot of other ways that you either don't want them intentionally to be using it, or you haven't even thought of them using it? What are the ways that we prevent that from happening? So I think you have to map all that out early on and say, hey, in my 90-day timeline, how am I going to get all of these things built into the system? And what's my roadmap for making sure I do that? Probably want to also make sure that if, no one person has expertise over all domains of a system deployment. So who are my people around me, and what are their roles, and what are their levels of expertise, and what are they the best at, and what are they going to be responsible for over this next 90 days? Because I want to make sure that those roles on my team are clearly defined, and that I have the people doing the jobs that they should be doing, because that's the thing that they're good at doing, right? And so we make sure we set that team up and they have support and they understand where we're going over that next 90-day period to get to production. I have a stress test in place. I have unit tests in place. I have all these things that are going to say, okay, at every step of the process, have I ensured that my system does what it's intended to do, that it can handle unexpected things that are thrown at it? And then I think the other thing that's really key is, how are my users, how am I going to demonstrate to my users and give them the level of confidence that But at the end of the day, and when I say users, I really mean my client, like that the thing
Yeah.
that they're asking me to do, that it is doing that and it will continue to do that. And it is going to satisfy all the requirements that they've set forth, because ultimately that's the person who needs to be 100% assured that they're getting what they've asked for with this system. Right. And so how am I going to go and demonstrate that they should have a level of comfort in the assurance that the system that we've built to solve the problem that they need to have solved does exactly what it needs to do and is going to do that reliably over time, and that we're going to know if anything goes wrong with it, right? So we've got to document all those things. We've got to set that out into a plan, and we've got to get regular feedback, right? So I think that the other really important component there is establishing channels of feedback with your team, with your customer, to say, I need you to assess, have we done the things that we said we were going to do? I need to be able to hear if things are going wrong, if there are things that you're not satisfied about, or if you're happy, I want to hear that too, right? So we need to have a good assessment of what we've done, where we're going, and whether we are on the right track. And we've got to have those milestones laid out ahead of time. If we can lay out that plan, we have all those feedback mechanisms in place, and we know that we can get to delivery at the end of that 90 days, then it's just about executing the plan at that point. And I know you have a project management background. That's the good part, right? When you have the plan and you can start following through with it, and okay, if something goes wrong, I have my backup. I have my backup in mind. I have all these contingencies in place. All I have to do is follow the script, right? But what you can't do is go into that 90 days with no script and try to make it up on the fly. That's just not going to.
Yeah, this is really insightful and very valuable, because with AI just like sweeping through the market, we faced waves where some roles were thought are going to be redundant. Some processes were going to be redundant, and lots of things that we thought, okay, no, we don't need that. It's not software development anymore. It's not like going through improvement loops or setting the feedback loops with the end user. Lots of those delivery frameworks had been disrupted by AI. There are changes in the way we deliver software development, but the key elements that we need to keep in the loop is the feedback loops, and having a plan on what we're doing and how we're going to measure it, and how it's going to affect the end user. What does the end user think about the system that I'm building? Is it really what they're looking for? Is it not? And how can I focus on what is going to deliver that value into production? Appreciate this amazing playbook, which is it's not just bare minimum. It's really a full loaded with experience and practical steps that our listeners could take away and implement in their daily practice. The resilience in it, and maintaining personal well-being, which is another element. So I would love to give you the space to inspire us with your journey a bit more, and give us some insights on how you came to found your own consultancy and providing the services you are doing now for key healthcare solutions, key healthcare providers, and working on interpretable AI systems that deliver value in production, demystifying psychology and how it helps teams set the right expectations, and highlighting your philosophy and approach, which is quite unique and rare. And from those insights, I would like to invite you to tell us a bit more about your story.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I mean, I've just kind of been a lot of different places over the course of my professional career. I mean, so I grew up outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I did my undergrad education at Carnegie Mellon University in information systems. One little interesting fact, and maybe this just says something about how old it is. I was during my undergrad career, my senior year, we had the first Wi-Fi enabled classroom definitely in the country, I think in the world.
Amazing.
Right. Like that seems so, like, why should we be amazed at that right now? But like at the time, we walked in on the first day and they handed us a laptop, and everybody's saying like, well, where do I plug it in? And they're like, you don't have to, you can just sit down and use it. And that that was not that long ago. That was, 2000, it was 25 years ago, right? So in 25 years, we come from like, you have to plug in whatever computer you're on to be in the internet to like, we've got this LLM based AI, which is pretty remarkable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, after graduation, I was an IT project manager for about 6.5 years, and it was a really great introduction to my professional career. Ultimately, I thought I wanted to do something different. And so, I left that and I went back to school to get to pursue my PhD in psychology. So I ended up in social psychology, graduated from Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia, in 2012, and I took an academic track. So I taught at several schools, kind of ultimately landing in New York City. I was teaching at the City University of New York, running my own research lab. I had this very niche research area, which was, we talk about it a bit in the podcast, about threat detection. Specifically, I was investigating sensitivity to disease threat and its association with political attitudes, which was the most obscure research area until a thing called COVID came along. And then, that's actually what we were living through, is this kind of prominent disease threat and a whole lot of kind of political coalition springing up around it. And so, but I had actually left academia by that time. So I left in 2016, just more for family reasons. My wife and I were both psychologists and were pursuing a job to try to be in the same city. And so we kind of just landed in Charlottesville, Virginia, serendipitously, and I took a job in data science. I mean, I was teaching a lot of statistics and research methods primarily in my academic. So I had this like pretty deep statistical background, and so I made this transition to data science, and that's where I was building systems, particularly the early warning system, but we were doing a lot of other kind of predictive analysis and forecasting work for the University of Virginia Hospital at that time, which was really formative. It was an amazing learning experience.
Yeah. I
learned so much in that role, and had my children during that time. And so kind of really kind of personally changed a lot and grew a lot, I think, during that time as well. Ultimately, so I kind of hit a point where there was nowhere else to go there, though. I was supporting this system and maintaining it, but it kind of wasn't growing, and just kind of was looking to branch out and gain new experiences. I think one thing about me is I get restless if I'm not learning something new.
Yeah,
So
I can tell that. Yeah.
I'm
Myself
constantly
too.
looking for kind of the next thing to wrap my head around, and the next challenge, and then that ended up being starting my own business. So
Yeah.
I started my own consultancy, Commonwealth Data Solutions, in 2023. But I started a little bit earlier, but that's when I kind of really took my leap and said, I'm going to go off on my own and
Amazing. Yeah.
do this. And I've had, a number of different clients since then, and I've gotten great experience because I haven't had a specific industry that I work a lot with healthcare. I work a lot with nonprofits too, but it's more about kind of the technologies that I build. And I have this kind of core data science set, and I've done a lot with forecasting. I've done a lot with predictive analytics and predictive modeling. I've done a lot of work with simulations. And so it's targeting that sort of work across some different industries. And I'm actually working a lot with AI now as well. So it's been a great way. Last 6 months, I've done a lot of work with AI, and kind of my background in academic publishing has me working with a great client, Hum, who is local, and they're building tools for journal editors to assist and hopefully add some efficiency around the manuscript review process. Because, there's this AI is playing both sides of that role. They're AI tools we're building to help editors and to help reviewers in this process. But AI is also helping people write faster. And so the reason that editors and reviewers need these tools is because they are getting more and more and more manuscripts submitted, because people are writing a lot faster because of AI as well. And so those editors and journals need to keep up. It's been a great way to learn in a very practical, hands-on way, just about kind of all these things we can do with LLMs and how quickly that world is changing. It's been a great experience. And so continuing to build my consultancy around those core capabilities and to try to serve businesses and hopefully to do that in a way that is responsible as possible, and is a way to just really help people grow. I mean, that's my main goal, is to add value in a way that is going to help businesses grow and be responsible in especially smaller businesses, startups, nonprofits. Like, it's hard to compete with big, well-funded businesses, but I think AI gives us a tool to help us do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a big, big divide in the market, but
Yeah.
I
And I don't
mean,
want to see that push people out, right? And so that's one value I've really tried to focus on as I've gone. Right.
absolutely. This is really key. And Russ, appreciate you telling us about your journey and how we've come across a combined different experiences to form this amazing expertise that really caters for the market needs from across healthcare and commercial settings. And the through line in your career in using data and models to make decisions earlier, faster, and with greater confidence, and being honest about uncertainty. I trust from what you've said and from what I've learned from you, you're really excited that the AI momentum remains disciplined. And as we've heard throughout the episode and our conversation, that we should start with the problem, not the model, and that we should measure what matters and deploy only when the process is safe, useful, and maintainable.
Absolutely.
And that balance, like the technical rigor with the psychological insight and the operational pragmatism, this is the rare balance and the rare mix that the market needs and lots of people, lots of companies need at the moment. And this is what you bring and what we've learned from you and what we would like to bring to our clients and to the market, that we want AI that actually works and is responsible and inclusive for everyone that uses it. Russ, thank you so much for being with us today on ZeroGrade Talks. It has been an amazing, informative chat, and the key takeaways are invaluable, and the insights you've given us are very practical. Appreciate your time with us today on ZeroGrade Talks.
And thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Looking forward to the next time.